All right, Blakely, welcome to the Vertical SaaS Podcast. Excited to have you on, man. Thank you for joining us.
For sure. Honored. Thank you.
It's the early days of the show, but as I said to the first guest, when we're 400 episodes in and we're got 1 million subscribers, you can proudly say you're one of the first inaugural guests on the show.
There you go. Yeah,
But,
you can work
Blakely,
out
why
your
don't you
kinks
do
with me.
as myself and the listeners an introduction about yourself? It'd be great for you to really high level just introduce yourself, who you are, who you work for. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm a tech nerd. I've spent my whole career in tech and startups, minus the first few years when I realized I did work for a Fortune 50 company, and it was a wonderful company. I don't like trash them, but I could not handle the pace of a large company. Since then, I've been 13 years in uh, high growth tech software companies, and I've been fortunate to be a part of a couple pretty cool ones, uh, and we can go into that if you'd like to.
Hmm.
But now I'm the chief strategy officer of an up and coming startup in Utah called Redo that focuses in the e-commerce space, and we think we have uh, uh, we think we're pretty special and pretty unique. So
Mm. And you are the chief strategy officer at Redo. That's correct, yeah.
yep.
Yeah. And look, I love the kind of journey, from yourself. For those that again don't have their LinkedIn profile in front of you about who Blakely is, as you say, spent some time in corporate, and of course then moved very much into startup world for the past 13 years, and some of the journeys that you've been on. Um, to name a few, Instructure, Divvy, both exits. I mean, it'd be great if you gave us a very high level there, but think more kind of soup to nuts. It'd be great to hear about your journey. You're a finance, SaaS, startup guy. You've been part of raising a lot of money, raising a lot of funds for different companies. Like, how did it start for you? Going way back, like, how did you get started in your career? And maybe let's just touch upon the some of the really interesting journeys that you've been on, those of which I've mentioned in Instructure and Divvy. But yeah, going way back, how did it all start for you, Blakely?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because I get asked by students a lot. Like, I get a handful of students that come in and tour. Usually, they're finance and accounting degrees that want to come and talk and hear about my career. And
Hmm.
a lot of times they ask like, how did you know what you want to do? The answer is I didn't, right? I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was really young. But my dad worked in like finance, and I was like, maybe I should major in that because it has money. Um, but one thing that I noticed that was interesting about myself when I was in school, this is 400 years ago or whatever, is if I go back and I look at what I spent my spare time doing there, is I would read a lot, right? Because you're sitting in your classes, not, some are really interesting, some suck. And in those classes that sucked, I would read the news. And when I was reading that news, I would always end up on, at the time it was like TechCrunch and VentureBeat. And all I cared about was what was going on in tech, who was raising money, what was the new technologies that were being built. And so I had a natural pull towards this tech software side of things. Now, when it came to graduation, um, I was actually working on a startup, but I was a newly married guy with no money, and I got a job offer at Dell Computer, and huge company, right?
Yeah.
I think at the time it was like 70, 80 billion dollars of revenue. I can't remember. Don't audit me. Something like that. And and they offered me this opportunity to be part of a leadership program. So I went out there, I was on a leadership program. You do a bunch of rotations. And then after those rotations, I ended up on their corporate strategy team, which was like literally doing the work of the CFO and Michael Dell, the projects that they had as their top priority. That was our job on this team. And I hated it. I loved the people. I actually give Dell a lot of credit for their pace, for how big they are. Like I do think they're one of the most startup minded companies of that size, but I couldn't handle it. Right? It was like torture for me. The idea of like working on a project And it was just like, it would take a year to move an inch forward, right? So I was like, screw this. That's when I started going back to my roots and saying like, hey, I always loved venture and tech. And I started saying, hey, I was in Austin, Texas at the time. I was like, hey, I want to go back to Utah where I'm from. There's a good tech scene there. And there were a handful of super sexy, popular tech CEOs or founders. And one of those was Josh Coates, who had sold his previous company to EMC for like $80 million. I thought that was really cool. So I knew that he was part of this startup Instructure. Now, and I just like started reaching out to everybody I knew that worked at Instructure. At the time, it had 100 and something employees. And I was just pinging everybody and just trying to get an in to meet someone. And I got in, I met their CFO. And I just was like, we just hit it off, right? Because I had kind of this established understanding because I did this rotation and leadership program. And then I was a corporate strategy team. And then he's like a startup guy that's trying to scale it. And they had kind of found product market fit. They were like 10 million of revenue. And we hit it off. And the CFO hired me. I took a pay cut and I went to the startup world. And that's really where I think my career began. Everything before that, I learned a ton. Right. But it was when I entered the startup world that all of a sudden I could see that everything I worked on mattered. And you're breaking up just a little bit. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you fine. Keep going.
You're good? Okay. So when I was at Instructure, I got there and the very first project they put me on is like, hey, they just raised a Series B from Bessemer Venture Partners, so a top tier VC, and they're like, "Hey, where are we going to scale? How do we want to scale this thing?" And they gave me a project, and I built a go-to-market strategy. I presented it to the CEO and the CFO, and they loved it, and they accepted it, and they did everything I said, and it just opened my eyes. Because like at this big company at Dell, I was like, "Oh, I do all this work. It takes a year to move an inch. I can't even tell if I'm impacting anything." First, I moved to a startup. I literally, within my first month, I'm proposing millions of investments to the CEO, and he's saying, yes, let's do it. And I'm like, I'm sold. This is my world. I want to be in control of of my destiny. And I would say at Instructure, I would call myself the guy beneath the guys. I had a lot of influence. I had the ear of this executive team, but I was not on the executive team. But I am so grateful for those leaders there. And I imagine we'll talk about this through the podcast, of these leaders that kind of like, they saw potential in me and they bet on me, and they would put and it gave me a lot of opportunity to learn and grow and develop. And Instructure is, just so those of you who don't know, it's Canvas. If you're in the US, it is the leading learning management system. Internationally, it's also the leading learning management system in the market today. And I was able to be a part of that from 10 million till about just under 100 million, and we took it public in 2015. And then I stayed on for 3 more years till we got about 200 and something million of revenue. And then Josh, the CEO, decided to kind of move to chairman, hire a new CEO. And I was like, oh, this is my perfect chance to move on to my next phase of my career. And that's when I got a part of another startup. So my next startup, I was like, I can't be the guy beneath the guys anymore. I now want to be the guy. So I got introduced to a couple. I was friends with a bunch of VCs in the community, and they introduced me to Blake Murray, who's the founder of Divvy. And Divvy was about $1 million of run rate revenue. And I came on board, and he hired me as like the CFO, and I came on board to just scale that thing. And we could talk a lot about Divvy, but we scaled that to within 5. It's probably the fastest growing company in Utah history. So when we were there, it's about $1 million. When I left, it was probably just shy of 500 million, give or take. And in the middle of that, we sold it to Bill.com for $2.5 billion. So I had the privilege of like learning from some excellent entrepreneurs, then trying it myself to scale the company and sell it. And then now we're on the same group of guys and people that were involved in Divvy. We are now on to another startup, which is Redo. And we just closed our Series A of $24 million, and we're all guns a-blazing, ready to scale this thing. And right now it's on the same growth trajectory as Divvy. with a third of the headcount. So we're pretty excited about its potential.
Wow, man. What a journey, kind of back to back and on the third type of journey similar to Instructure and Divvy. I think just as a kind of side point, you know, how you got into Instructure, like you messaged 100 odd people at the business, you know, obviously on my side of what I do, yes, podcasting is something that we love to do by creating a community, but we are an executive search firm at Zanata, and one of the questions that I get asked a lot is that what should people be doing right now in such a competitive market? How are you going to get the attention of people? And it just shows you know, all those years ago, nothing's changed because we're advising people to do that now. Don't hit one click apply. Don't just apply and hope that you're going to get an interview. Like, hustle, man. Treat it like a sales process. And we all act like this is new information. It's not. People have been doing this for 20 years. It's no different. You know, so I just thought that was a really great bit of insight there.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I've never gotten a job from just throwing an application in, right? You get a job from like a connection point or a friend or a recommendation. Like, it's the same way I hire. I want somebody that comes recommended or somebody that has a good reference, right? So just think of that in reverse. Like, if you can be recommended, your probability just skyrockets. Yeah,
and you know, going back to Instructure and Divvy, and there's many other parts to discuss, but just like what were those? Because this is what everyone's looking to do, right? Exit in 4 to 5 years. You know, they say horizontal SaaS typical exits 10 years ago is about 5 years now. Typical exits are about 10 years, but I don't necessarily think that is the formula now. I just think it's more of the market shifted. But you've been through some hyper-scaling, particularly at Divvy. Like, what do you think, what was that like? Just going from 1 million ARR to literally in 4 years, like 500 plus? Like, what was it like, and what were the biggest lessons that you learned?
It's interesting. People so often, you're on the outside looking at a company and you're like, oh, look at that rocket ship. It would be so fun to just jump on a rocket ship and be a part of it. But I'll tell you what the rocket ship feels like when you're on it. It feels like it's a rocket that you're trying to make it to the moon, but in the process, your wings are falling off, right? Your things are exploding. Your oxygen's going out. You fall out of the rocket ship a few times. You're holding onto the side of the rocket. Like, it's just a complete mess. Like, that's how it feels when you're at a high growth company. It doesn't feel smooth sailing. It's not easy. Like, and I will say, like, having now done it a few times and feeling the insanity of of how hard it is, it's given me some patience and some scar. I like to say scar tissue. I have a lot of scar tissue. It takes a lot now for me to move emotionally from a business thing, because I've seen it all. I've had a company that was flying high, and then one day we thought it was dead, and then the next day it wasn't dead again. I've had that happen now so many times that I have some principles that I kind of live by, and one of them is just kind of you just got to keep moving forward. You got to keep pushing through, and especially when it sucks, you got to keep pushing through. When it's great, you just got to keep moving forward, because there are a lot of ups and downs in building a company.
And I guess if you were to go back, and do things differently, I mean, would you? Because it was a success on both accounts.
Probably do a ton different, right? If I had hindsight, but I don't know that you'd be successful if you knew all the answers. If you had all the answers, would you have been successful? I don't know. One of the things, have you ever read about the concept of the idea maze? It's not a concept I came up with, but
No.
Part of building a startup and part of your advantage is if you're the one that's innovating in a market, you're the one that's going through an idea maze. You have to figure out, do I go right? Do I go left? Do I go forward? Do I go backwards? Do I do this product? Do I do this feature? Do I talk to customers this way or that way? And you're going to go through all these idea mazes throughout your company, and your employees are going to go through it, not just the founder. The founder is only the one that's doing it the most in the beginning, but then you have to even teach all your employees and your sales reps and everybody that they have to navigate this idea maze. And sometimes what that means is the second you hit a wall, which you'll hit a ton of walls, you have to just keep pushing on through that wall, right? And that the fact that you did go through the crap is what made you successful, right? So if I knew everything from the end, that stuff might have actually not worked right from the beginning. It worked because of how we navigated it and what we learned along the way. So would I have changed stuff? I think I would. That doesn't mean it would have worked, right? I would have had a new idea maze. Would I have been smart enough? I don't know. So
yeah, it's a big question, but like I think there's a couple of things that I want to ask around. I guess, what do you think it is that is the key factors in the success at both of those companies? You know, but we can come back to that in a minute. But let's just, for the audience, you've mentioned Redo, the Series A, 20+ million in funding. Like, just for the listeners, can you give a bit of an overview of the mission and vision at Redo, please?
for sure. So Redo is conceptually, its beginning is just super simple. Redo is return software for e-commerce companies, right? Except we're free. We make money in different ways. We don't charge you any SaaS fee. We charge you nothing. This is the same way that Divvy worked. Divvy was expense management, but it was free. We love that go-to-market, right? Now, we make plenty of money, but we do it in ways that the merchant doesn't have to make a big financial decision, and it changes the entire go-to-market process. But that's what Divvy is, if I say it quickly. But if I tell you what I think Divvy is from a bit broader vision, we have looked at this e-commerce space, and for so many years, right now, these e-commerce companies, for so many years, have had to navigate like 20 apps to manage their business. It's extremely painful, right? 20 apps, they all claim to be integrated, but all their integrations break all the time. It's a full-time job to manage all these integrations. Half of these e-commerce guys are entrepreneurs. They don't even want to try to use all their capabilities. So they have all these millions of point solutions, and it's just a mess. And they also, what's happened is all these point solutions are trying to make money, and so they start like nickel and diming the merchants. So they're not only are they have to manage a lot, they're feeling nickeled and dimed by these merchants because they're all trying to make money on point solutions. We want to throw that concept away together, and we actually believe in like this platform concept. So today Redo is a lot more than returns. We do returns, we do package protection, we do warranties, we do customer support, we do order tracking, etc. And most of these things that we do are free, or we make money in different ways, right? I don't want to say that we never do SaaS. We don't hate SaaS. We just want to reduce friction for the merchants and make their life easier. So we would rather we would rather it feel as free as possible to have a platform, because now you're attacking two ways. They don't have the complexity of managing a lot of apps. Plus, they're not getting nickeled and dimed, and that's exactly how we're attacking the market.
Mm. And we're seeing this evolution of less SaaS-focused solutions and more making money off maybe the back end or different avenues. Like, how do you guys make money?
So today we make multiple ways is the answer, but I'll say that the primary way is what we've looked at the core problem for merchants, which is they are getting destroyed by returns, right? It has just cost them so much money, but because there's Amazon out there, that's like a market standard that says free returns, which by the way, they've changed a lot of that. They're not always free returns. They'll say fast shipping now, but we heard free returns for so many years. You haven't realized it yet, but they're actually charging you for that return now a lot of times. But it'll feel like free returns, but these merchants are trying to match that, and they can't compete on that. It's too expensive for them. So what we've said is, well, what if we could actually offer it as an option for shoppers? So as a shopper checks out, it says, hey, for $1, you can get free returns. But other than that, no returns. But if you pay $1 on checkout, so it's $100, I add $1, now I get free returns. What's fascinating that we found is we can increase conversion rates, we can increase the average spend per visitor, and we eliminate the cost of return for the merchant. So not only does it win for the merchant, it also wins for the shopper. And it's just because you're building that you're allowing that free returns concept to be marketed but they're paying for it up front. It's like an option. They're paying $1 for the option to return something. And it turns out, and 70% of the time, people say, yes, I'd like that option.
And presumably the I'm just trying to think why a company in the past hasn't tried to fix this universally global, I would imagine, massive problem, and it's probably worth a lot of money in terms of market cap.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know. So I can go off on this. I think that there are a lot of bad habits that companies had when there was zero interest rates. Let me explain, because I'm gonna tie this back. When you're in a zero interest rate environment, there's a huge incentive to just be a point solution, right? To just whatever you're making money on, you focus on it. And by the way, they're not looking that much at your efficiency. They're not looking much at anything besides your revenue. And even that, they're pretty forgiving because money's so cheap. You can get funded, and they'll keep working on it. What it actually makes you though, when money's easy to get, is it makes you stupid, right? It makes you lazy, because you're not focusing on the important metrics. You're not looking at the proper product expansions that are required because you think you're successful with what you're currently doing, as opposed to having fear, and that comes from a market where money's hard to get, right? So now money is really hard to get, and it's awesome for consumers. It's really terrible to be a startup guy, right? Like right now, we can talk a lot about it. This is a terrible environment to do startups, but it is an awesome time to be consumers, because what's happening is these companies like us are being forced to be innovative. They're being forced to, constraint is actually causing them to not be lazy. And you're getting more of these platform type plays. So like, for example, in a market where when money is harder to get, it's an incentive to do this platform. Because you probably heard that phrase all the time, like building companies, just the bundling and unbundling of services. You probably heard that quote. Everybody has.
Yep.
I would actually say, at least what we're experiencing right now, is that is tied to the cost of money. Bundling is when money is expensive, and unbundling is when money is cheap, because I can focus on a point solution. Anyway, hopefully it's just a perspective I have on what's going on in the market right now.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and coming into Redo, the business was founded when 2017. Is that correct, or is that data inaccurate on Crunchbase?
I think that data is inaccurate. It's hard to know because like the original founder had. Here's what I think is getting mixed up. The original founder of Redo, Taylor, was a e-commerce guy, so he had e-commerce companies. And returns were a problem. That's why he started this business. But I think it was actually started more like 2022 is when it really started getting some momentum, right? When he actually started spending time and energy on it.
So 2022, set the scene, company's founded, they've got a finance guy in, you're a previous finance guy, and then Sterling asks you to come in, and he asks you to come in and do 4 or 5 things, I think. Like, coming into... Because I remember in our prep call you said, look, you've got a great finance guy already. Like, you don't need me. And he's like, I don't need you to come in and do finance. I want you to do these things. Like, what did you get brought in to do?
It's a good question. And they do have an elite finance guy. He was my right-hand man at Divvy. He's a dynamite. I love him to death. I'm like, I think he's spectacular. His name's Eric LaPret, everybody. But
shout out to Eric.
Shout out to Eric, my guy. But so when Sterling reached out to me, he talked to me about like, hey, I have these 4 to 5 things that keep me up at night. He called them existential threats to Redu's success. And he said, please just come and help me solve these. I need somebody who owns these and thinks about them day and night. And I said to him, I think this role's stupid. I don't think strategy roles make any sense. I think finance is strategy. But I just love Sterling to death. I love Eric to death. There's a ton of these former Divvy guys like that are on the executive. Everybody except our CTO is former Divvy guy. So there are all these people that I've worked with, I've loved, and I'm like, I'll come and we'll see what the role becomes. That was my perspective. Now that I'm in it, we've kind of have structured functions. It's almost like my role has become something like if product, hardcore like operations and finance had a baby, it's like right in the middle of that. So I'm in charge of a lot of where the product is headed and where we're going to spend our money. Like think of like Divvy think of Redo, sorry, as a multi-product platform we're an investment hub that is investing in products that are in different stages. We think of ourselves almost like a VC, and we're investing in these different startups. And it's my job to figure out who should we invest in, how much should we invest at what given times for various products. Like I told you, we have support and order tracking and warranties. Those are products we've invested money and time in, and that's my job to help figure out that how much we want to invest in them. It's also, which is part finance, part product, right? But then it's also, I have another part of the role that's more aligned with existential threats. So one of the concepts we have is if we go back to how we monetize, we charge shoppers, which is really good for the merchants because they get free returns. But for the shoppers, we need to make sure that however we charge them and however we position ourselves there is a benefit to the shoppers. It needs to improve conversion rates. It needs to be improve the spend per visitor, etc. And it's my job to make sure that we do that. So I'm constant. I have a team that's literally set up to just constantly be A/B testing ways that we present Redo, ways we talk about Redo, ways we talk about returns and warranties and all these things to make sure it's a net positive to the merchant and the shopper at all times. So that's another part of my role, which I would say that's a little like an operations type of role, right? Like a COO-ish type role. And that's kind of like how, I mean, I'm oversimplifying it a bit.
Sure.
But that's kind of, it's my role today is somewhere between product finance and operations.
Yeah. And I think going back to why someone never did this before, did it successfully, I think it's because even in the 27 minutes we've been speaking, the passion that shines through from you and I would imagine from the rest of the leadership team to build a better product constantly and build it as fast as possible, I don't think has probably been resonated or executed in the same way that you guys are executing it. So it really does boil down to the people as to why it's taken off like a rocket ship. So, but look, I mean, you've been part of multiple successful exits we ran through. The question I wanted to ask, which was a bit of I guess, dimly asked the way I was going to ask, what is it that makes these companies successful in your head? But I think a better way to ask it is that when you are approached about joining a business, when you see a business, for you got obsessed with Instructure, you got obsessed with joining the business, you message loads of people, like, what are the early indicators for you that signal that a company is ready for rapid scaling and is going to be able to go on that journey of a 4 or 5 year absolute rocket ship? Like, there must be maybe 3 or 4 things.
God, I wish I could tell you, man. Like, that's such a hard question. Like, if I was perfect at knowing that, I would be the best venture capitalist in the world. And just to tell you, I am not. I have definitely had some bad seed investments. But let me tell you a couple things I do look at, right?
Yep.
And it's hard to we could spend an entire time just talking about this. Yeah. But at a high level, I would say I care a ton about the people that are involved. So if you think about Instructure, I joined that company because I knew Josh had sold the company and I wanted to learn from Josh. And when I joined Divvy, it was because one of the VCs that I really respected at the time, they had been flirting with me for a while, and he reached out and says, "Here's my top 2 companies. Please go talk to the CEOs." So I had known that they were not only a VC looking at a whole portfolio, but they said, "Here's their top 2." So again, he was pointing me in the right direction, and I think that helped me make a decision. And then at Redo, it was people. I would actually, it was just the people, right? It was that simple. So that's how I've made my decisions. When I look at the company, I would say there are 2 things I spend a lot of time thinking about. One is TAM, like is the market big, right? And it doesn't mean that let me be clear.
I mean,
Like sometimes the market,
how big does the market have to be? Like the TAM?
Stupid big, because you're only going to grab a small piece of it. And I'm not saying like this isn't a pitch. This is you deciding to go there. You better believe that that company can see $1 billion of revenue and have line of sight to it, or you should not waste your time. Because to go and get if you don't have line of sight there, investors are investing on the line of sight to that. So if you have a smaller increments along the way, like you better be figuring out how to make it a bigger TAM, because it matters a ton to scale it. Otherwise, you won't be able to. They're so hard to scale. Now that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't go and do a niche market or whatever. I'm just saying, like for me, like I need to see line of sight to $1 billion of revenue, or I'm not even like spending any energy on it.
And for you to see for you to see $1 billion of revenue in sight, like how big does that total addressable market have to be? Are we talking like 100 billion, like 50 billion?
I don't look at it. It's a reasonable question. That's not how I look at it, because I mean I get that VCs do that and it's like that. So there's two things that I kind of look at. One is I'll say, okay, who are the comparable companies in this market and where have they been able to get? Yeah. Right? Because I'm displacing them, I'm innovating on them, but you can go look at a market and you can say like, okay, like let's pick a CRM, right? Like, so let's say you were trying to do a CRM. You can go look and see Salesforce is freaking huge. HubSpot is freaking huge. Like, and that's like, wow, that market's big. And it doesn't have to be some figment of your imagination. You can go look at like what I spent a lot of time when I was thinking about e-commerce looking at, I was like, oh, returns only companies don't get that big. They get to 100 to $200 million of revenue. They don't get bigger than that. Why? I was like, well, we're going to have to monetize differently. And we're probably going to have to go bigger than just returns to become a platform. And that's when I started saying like, well, let's see who's outside of just returns, who's gotten big. And you start saying things like, oh, well, now you've got Klaviyo and you've got MailChimp and you've got these other companies that you could argue are, and what did they do? What actions did they take? And then I can start painting a picture of what we need to look like in the future. And do I think I can get there? So it doesn't mean that I'm saying, oh, just because the biggest returns company is $100 to $200 million, we'll never get bigger. I'm acknowledging a fact that that's how it's been. So why do I believe I'm different? Otherwise, I'm an idiot. I'm naive, right? Because like that's what it's been. And who has gotten big and what are their attributes? And how do I become more like the really big guy? And that's kind of where we've evolved to like we monetize returns totally differently. I could spend a lot of time explaining why I think it's a TAM expander. But also I've looked at Klaviyo and I've said, maybe we need to go into different markets so that we're not so reliant on returns. But sorry, that's very Redo-centric on how to think about it, but at least I can tell you how my head has thought about it, right? And how I think about the addressable market.
Well, no, that's how you give the best examples. I mean, one thing that always interested me with your experience is that you've always been in vertical software, and I wanted to get your assessment of the market, horizontal SaaS versus vertical SaaS. Like you talk about returns and automation, returns and exchange automation. That is super niche, but obviously within e-commerce is a huge total addressable market. But like, why do you think we're kind of coining a phrase around vertical software? This is the Vertical SaaS Podcast, playing devil's advocate a little bit. Is it really a new term, or has vertical software really always been around, but now we're just seeing effectively the death of horizontal SaaS?
I think vertical software to me, we're playing a definitions game, right? Software always has to pick a specific market. I can't even think of a company. I would say yes, you have like Salesforce and Workday.
Yeah.
But if you think about how they started, it's like Workday was enterprise, HRIS, if I remember correctly. They started small, which you could say, hey, is that a vertical play? Right? HRIS, it's like, is HRS involved vertical, or are you saying, would it have to be HRIS in healthcare? That's vertical. I think that, let's be careful. In my head, I don't understand the nuance and the semantics here. I feel like Redo in some ways we're super vertical, right? We're in e-commerce, we're supporting e-commerce companies, but I would also say in some ways we're super horizontal, right? Because we're building a platform that's going to be multiple products. So like, which are we? Are we a horizontal e-commerce play? Like, I don't know. But I think, I do think that, let's just say this, and whatever you do, you have to be, you can't just be better, you have to be different, right? And to be different, it's probably easier if you start in a niche, some sort of niche, but then you have to have some sort of line of sight to a big enough TAM, right? So we started in returns e-commerce Shopify, right? That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
But then we're expanding outside of that to be like, no, we're returns plus support, or returns plus package protection. And by the way, we're not just Shopify, we're Commerce Cloud. And we're not just Commerce Cloud, we're Comment Sold. And we're not just Comment Sold. Like, we're expanding in multiple directions. And that's almost like, if I was to say like, hey, you're a vertical play, I would argue like, are you sure the TAM's big enough? If not, maybe you need to expand, different ways. And that's where it doesn't mean that you're not vertical SaaS. It's just your definitions are changing. You are becoming a more broad play. And I do think the market is valuing some of this more platform-ish products right now. Like these, you need to be more than just a point solution today. Mm-hmm. But I don't think point solution and vertical SaaS are the same thing. I think those are different things.
No. I mean, how do you, another question I always wonder, because I think it's one of the silent killers of startups. It's what I would call product featureitis, and it's building more and more products beyond your core offering. Like, you talk about it, so you're convinced about what you're building at redoing, probably in the past as well, 100% in the past, that if we build this will expand this will expand the TAM. But you're so confident of it. Like, how do you know when is there any indicators again that tells you, right, guys, we're ready to go beyond our core offering? Like, it's not going to be the demise of us now.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Like, if you think about startup advice in the past, it's always been, specialize in something and spend all your time and energy on that thing, right?
Yeah.
And I would argue that that's what you should do when money is plentiful. Because when money is plentiful, it means like I can just get so focused on this that somebody's willing to just fund this smaller addressable market, more niche play. But when money isn't plentiful, you do need to be bigger, right? So that might still work in really huge TAMs, but in these smaller TAMs, you need to kind of think bigger. So now here's what I'll say is like, we are walking the opposite direction of be specialized in one thing. We are 100% building a platform, but we're very cognizant of the risks that come. Like, well, what if you become a master of nothing, right? And we're like, well, no, we're going to be excellent in all the things. And how are we going to do that? So how we've done it is how we've set up our structure. So when I said before, we think of ourselves almost as like a parent that is investing in various seed stage companies that are going to grow up to be growth stage companies. That's exactly what we're doing. And we're hiring, we call them a general manager. There are many CEOs that are in charge of these products individually, and their incentives are completely around if they can turn it into a legitimate business that makes lots of money. So I have 7 mini CEOs at the company that I'm investing in as a team, that the executive team we're investing in as a team, and they're all at different stages of investment. So inside Redo, there's a company that's at the growth stage, returns. Inside Redo, we have another stage that's at like a Series A. Inside Redo, we have something that's at a seed stage, right? And we hold it to the same criteria that maybe a venture firm would as well. But then you have this benefit now, though, where it's like I got multiple startups going internally that all complement each other and can be cross-sold to each other. So this is where I say, like, your money can go so much farther. When I have returns that has 2,000 customers and I start selling like our package protection, well, 70% of those customers now use our package protection product. And 20 to 30% of our revenue is now using our order tracking product, or et cetera. It's because I can cross-sell it all internally, right? So there's just massive efficiency gains by having a multi-products platform internally. So
yeah. It's really interesting the way you speak about how you set up the internal additional products in the business, almost like mini CEOs, and you almost treat it like you are the VCs and you're putting them through your paces. And yeah, it's really interesting. But I'm conscious of the time that we both have here, and I wanted to get on to the kind of final part of our discussion more around culture and talent, because I think, look, you mentioned at the start of the show, people reach out to you a lot. You know, finance people coming out of university. How do we advance our career? And like the path, everyone listening to this is probably going to be operating a startup, but the path in startups is unclear. Promotion's not easy. You know, there's no consistent route to getting to the top. But like, what advice do you have for people that are, okay, you can take the idea of someone that's just got a finance degree, has spent a few years in Dell or whatever it may be, but you don't have to. You can make it more broader strokes, but I just think the actionable takeaways from someone with your level of experience, what would you advise someone? How do people get in front of you? How do people impress you? How have you seen generally people get promoted quickly within startups? It might seem like a fluffy question, but you know,
it's not a fluffy question. I think about this all the time, and there's another one we could spend a whole podcast thinking about. But let me divide it up into two things, right?
Yeah.
And this is how everybody should think about their role if they're trying to grow their career. You have table stakes, and then you have what matters, right? Table stakes are your job, right? Everything somebody's asking you to do, you got to do it. And by the way, you need to crush it. You need the fastest person to respond to your Slacks, your emails, your phone calls. You need to be the first one to respond. And that's a layup. That's just a table stake to be a high performer. You need to be clear and concise in your communication. That's a table stake. Leaders have to figure out how to do that. And I could go on and on based off your role, like on just the table stakes of expectations that you're supposed to do. Okay, great. That's your table stakes. Next, you have what actually matters, and it's the business, right? It's not hard to get promoted. Let me say, it's super hard, but it's not very hard to see how it happens. People that make the biggest impact get promoted in a startup. There's no ifs and buts about it. If you're at a huge company, they put in structure to slow you down. But startups don't get that. It's a true meritocracy. Best people, more money, more equities, please stay, right? So what I would say is just focus on where you're actually making an impact to the business. If you don't understand what are the true value drivers of your business, it's going to be really hard to get promoted. You need to understand what matters to the business, what matters to your boss, what matters to the executive leadership team. And then if you're focused on those and you're actually making an impact, people will just throw opportunities and money at you nonstop. And that's what we do at Redo. We literally have a conversation at least twice a month with who are our highest performers that we would die if they left us? How do we take care of them? How do we make sure they're happy? We talk about it every 2 weeks, nonstop. And it's always the same 6 or 7 or 8 people, right? Yeah. It's always, because they're just always, they're impact motivated. There's an irony here. Sometimes people that make the biggest impact will sacrifice table stakes. They're just but most people are really good at table stakes, and they also make an impact.
Yeah, but making an impact doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the loudest in the room, does it?
No.
You know,
some of them are quiet. Yeah. I do think they tend to be loud is the wrong word, Gavin, but maybe you can help me search for the right word. I do think you need to figure out how to make your presence and your impact known.
I think having a bit of stage presence, you know,
or I don't know. Let me give you this is a miniature example, but let's say you're doing a presentation to the executive team on what you did. It's probably worth it to make sure your slides are super sexy, right? Why would you ruin this amazing work with really ugly slides, right? Now that's just a nit, but what I'm giving an example of is that matters. It matters that people can understand and see your high impact. So I don't have a perfect answer there. I do think usually some things that people that are better at communicating and marketing their high impact things will do better than those that aren't good at marketing and talking about their high impact things. But good leaders will find it either way. So I guess that's the other thing I was trying not to jump to, Gavin. But the third thing is if you want to grow a lot in your career, you got to hitch your wagon to the really good leader, because a good leader takes away a lot of that work. Meaning, you don't have to go market yourself; they're going to market you. They're going to see the impact you're making instantly, and they're going to talk to you about it. If you get hitched to a bad leader, you could be making a high impact, but then it's up to you to figure out how to market it. So that's separate than what you individually are. But getting behind a good leader is the fastest accelerant to your career, maybe outside of being at a good company. See, I told you this, it just keeps like layering on, right? Table stakes, impact, good leader, good company. There you go. There's the 4.
That's it. It's all too much about table stakes. Turn up to your job on time. Be well liked. All of these things. It's like, man, come on. What are the actionable takeaways that people can take from this podcast and listen to people like you? And I think that was a great way to end it, Blakely. I've loved the insight. And I've loved the conversation, and I'm sure the listeners will too when this one goes out.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Gavin, for having me on. Hopefully somebody found this helpful.
Well, I did, so I'm sure the listeners will. But again, thank you for your time. Cheers, Blakely.